Slavery was fake. There were prisoners of war, though. A slave is a genetic determination, a Slav. These are prisoners of war in prison camps. Most of the men were slaughtered and the women and children were taken captive into slavery. These are just some of the examples of Aboriginal slavery that they tell us. This is only possible because the tribes were divided. This is ultimately why the resets happen. There have been at least 5 resets. That is why we see different eras of architecture in the Tartarian infrastructure. The fall from Eden was a reset. The Great Flood was a reset. The Tower of Babel was like a super evolved 5G tower, a communication tower. This reset changed the ether and scrambled the thoughts. Sodom and Gomorrah was a reset, indicative of meltology. As you can see, the mountains were the buildings. There are examples all over the Americas. The so-called natives identify with a low-tech culture. That's how you know they weren't the original people that were here that experienced those resets. They merely moved in. Native means born here, not Aboriginal. An Englishman that's born here is technically a native. Exodus was a form of a reset. The crossing of the Baja from Mexico, aka Mitzrayim, into Canaan, aka California. And finally we have the Babylonian exile, which was the slave trade. The slave trade was actually from North America to South America via the Caribbean, and vice versa. Those slaves were prisoners of war. Aboriginals. Millions of North American Shemites were brought to South America, and many South American Hamites were brought to North America. People lost wars and were shipped to the Caribbean. They were then reclassified before they were shipped to their destination. The average life expectancy on plantations was 7 years. It is not cost effective to ship them across the Atlantic when there is already an imprisoned population here. But yet the population of so-called slaves in America supposedly grew to almost 9 million by 1900. So in 240 years, the population went from less than 400,000 to 4 million by 1860, and then more than doubled in 40 years. The slave population grew because black slavers bred with their slaves. The fathers were killed, the mothers were taken, the new hybrid offspring became the slave class. Meanwhile, the so-called Native Americans only had 300,000 people by 1900. Even after being given land and business opportunity, they still remain only 3% of the population. These are Hittites, the offspring of Canaan. These Canaanites were supposed to be in the west. Western Canada and Alaska are the most west you can go. This is the land of the Hittites. These are Siberians, Hittites. They work with the colonists to this day. These Canaanites work with the black European colonizers. These black slaveholders had largely become pale by 1830 due to parasitic activity like inbreeding, routinely blocking Aboriginals from their birthright. And eventually these black colonists were overrun by their genetic slaves, also known as Christians. The Moors established the slave trade infrastructure. The biggest slave port was in Charleston, named after King Charles, aka the Black Boy, a Moorish descendant. That's why the crescent remains on the state flag. These Moors, or Moabites, were the biggest slave traders. After the slave uprisings like 1776, the mutant Moorish offspring were ran out in the Barbary Wars. Those who steal get stolen from. Don't rob yourself of opportunity to realize yourself.